Hey there, welcome to Valiant Rabbit Workshop. Today we're going to walk through the making of this little Fred figure. So we start with our little Fred here in ZBrush, and what we're trying to do is cut up the model so that all the pieces fit into each other after we print. We're also going to add keys to make sure all the pieces go exactly where we want them and there's no weirdness or sliding when we're putting on glue. So what I'm doing right now is actually joining pieces together and also cutting pieces with other pieces, which is a function ZBrush has. This isn't a full-on tutorial, so I'm not going to get too into it. So here I'm actually altering the teeth from the original sculpt. Just in case in the future I might want to mold this guy and make copies of him. You can't really have undercuts, so I had some gaps in the back of the teeth. That's why you see me pushing them into the face. So if you're actually interested in seeing how this little guy was sculpted, check out the link on the top right. That's the first video in this series. You can also see a couple of his little friends getting sculpted up. So here you're actually seeing me put some keys in. By no means is this are these the best keys you'll ever see. You know, usually you want to put a little taper in them. And there's other techniques you can do to make them a little better. But for the sake of this project, I think it's fine. I actually end up breaking some of them later in the video. So now we head into Cura. This is the program I use to slice up my files and send to the 3D printer. You can see right now I'm laying out the pieces. The orientation that you put them in does matter because I'm using a filament printer, and that tends to leave layer lines on your model. So you want to make sure those layer lines are going in the direction you're okay with. So here you see the final layout of the models with the supports, and as I slide this down you'll see the slices that will be printed. So layer by layer, little Fred is being built. The hands actually failed to print properly on the first attempt, but that happens a lot. So just keep trying, keep printing, you'll get it out. Altogether, this was about an 18-hour print. Probably my least favorite part of this process is cleaning up the print. So here you see me ripping off some of the supports by hand and also prepping it for painting. It can be a pain in the butt, but it must be done. So now I move on to ripping off the supports with this Swiss Army knife. I use this bottle opener because it kind of has a bladed end on it, so I'm able to get under the supports and pull them off. Also, I'm able to kind of carve with it if there's any little fragments left. This can be a pretty tedious process, but I encourage you to really take your time and clean up as best you can, as the better you do now, the better it'll look down the line. So once you're done taking off some of the supports with the tools, you'll end up having all these little nibs left over, and also the areas where the supports were touching the model tend to be kind of funky looking. So I usually take these little sanding sticks you can get on Amazon. They come in different grits, and you're actually able to do quite a lot of cleanup very quickly with them. So the last step in cleanup and prepping for paint is I like to use this wood filler to kind of get into any big gaps that were left over. Like I mentioned before, where the supports touched, those are good areas to run this over. Also, some areas the stepping of the layers is really noticeable, so I'll try to kind of smear in between. You can see here on the chin between the layer lines, you can see the wood filler. You give that a little bit of time to dry and you just sand it all smooth. And then the very last thing we do is put some tape on the spots where I plan to glue. You definitely don't want to glue paint to paint because it might come off over time. This will make it so that you're gluing plastic to plastic. Hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. It would really help me out. So for this particular figure, I'm using a pretty thick primer straight from an aerosol can. I'm really not trying to save details since he's so stylized. In fact, I'm hoping some of the layer lines might disappear with the thick paint. So for little Fred, I went with some acrylic paints that I just happen to have. They're not really fancy or anything. In fact, they're kind of cheap. They're stuff that's used for schools for craft projects and things like that. I kind of paid the price because they don't paint on very thick, so I ended up having to paint several coats for every piece to make sure I had a nice solid color. But in the end, it worked out. Now I'll just be quiet for a bit and let you enjoy the paint process. Did you miss me? Me neither. Okay, so now I'm getting the base coats done on all these pieces. It's time to put on secondary colors and also highlights and shadows just to kind of emphasize certain parts of the model. You'll see I spend a lot of time on the face, adding different tones to the fleshy muscles on Fred's face and also some dark rings around his eyes. He ends up kind of looking like a stop motion figure from a lot of the 90s stop motion films. Well, if you made it this far into the video, first of all, thank you. And if you really like what you saw, please hit that subscribe button. I plan to upload videos regularly, and they'll cover a bunch of different creative projects: 3D, woodworking, clay sculpting, all kinds of stuff. Now let's finish this guy up. Here I'm using some Game Workshop silver paint on the blades, and I end up using a red wash on Freddy's fleshy muscles on his face. With that stuff, you usually don't want it to pool up, but in this case I let it just to make him look extra tender.